So, sisters and brothers, welcome. It's nice to be together for really, I think, just sharing and some conversation about difficult questions around nonviolence. I think there's lots of difficult questions, and so maybe we could just bring them, bring our questions, and maybe we can explore some answers, collective wisdom together. I thought maybe we could just begin just by taking a minute to just check in with what's going on in my body, what's going on in my mind, what's going on in my heart. What are the sensations in my body? My feelings, what am I feeling? What kind of thoughts are rolling around upstairs? And maybe become aware that we are breathing. We are breathing. And there's a muscle in my chest beating, always beating. A life river through every part of me, my body. And I'm giving off water constantly through my body, through my breath. That I am alive. As I was preparing for this workshop, I was thinking about about nonviolence, and that the power of nonviolence is in each of us. And it's actually integral, essential. It's at work every second. It's our very being. It's the heart. It's the breath. It's that. How do we put into words? Soul, that life, that animating energy that is in me. That's in every person here, every person on this planet, every living being. Our interconnection and interdependent. That is, I think, the essential taproot of nonviolence, the power of nonviolence. And we are always in relationship to that. And so even, to fight or flight, protect, to use violence or not, all of that is in relation to that vital energy that's within us. And so I thought maybe I would just begin by sharing a little bit about sort of how I'm approaching the difficult questions of nonviolence in my own life, and then maybe we could just sort of open it up for a conversation. Maybe just we'll just see where it goes, and maybe a structure will suggest itself if we need one. But I'm thinking maybe just one person talk, then take a turn, and then until everyone's sort of shared, and then we'll sort of see. So for me, nonviolence was kind of a half-baked sort of fringe lunatic idea that I didn't really hear about it until I got to university, and thought it was ridiculous, and then sort of my way into it was through my tradition as a Catholic, sort of learning about Catholics who believed in the ancient Christian tradition of nonviolence, and were kind of continuing that. And so slowly it became kind of an intellectual thing for me that I slowly kind of found my way towards through in trying to live my faith. And then I felt sort of a disconnection between sort of as an idea and sort of how to put it into more practice, sort of. So I thought, well, I'll join Christian peacemaker teams, which was an experiment in nonviolence, in preparing teams to work in places of conflict, to intervene nonviolently once things have escalated to the point of armed conflict, or to prevent that from escalating to that point. So then I got this training and did some work, and that was fine. And then it was really tested because I was kidnapped and held hostage for 4 months. So it was immediately tested by captivity. And, this is where the captors keep their gun, or it's under the pillow right now. I could get it. What should I do here? Or I'd really like to escape, and maybe the only way to do that is to fight like hell, fight to the death, to get my freedom. Or I feel like I want to strangle one of my comrades in handcuffs with me right now. Or I really am in a rage at these men who have taken my freedom away. And then, lo and behold, snap of a finger, it's a crack special forces military unit that finds the captors and frees us in a matter of a minute, basically. So what I was longing for and wanted most desperately, returning my freedom, then was given back to me through pretty much like the elite mechanism of the military machine, the special forces. So, you know, there's some paradox there, and also that the people that the officials, the people in the system, the nation security state system, that busted us out, that they were, they actually really cared about us, and the soldiers, the flight crew that flew us in the Hercules from Baghdad to Dubai were really friendly, and were like, wow, you know, sign our flight books, and you know, what you guys are doing is really brave. That's braver than us, and they can, you know, like, just, you know, real people who are really noble and good people who are really serving Canada in the best way that they can. And so I've had to sift a lot through what do I really believe, and does my commitment to nonviolence make sense? Is it something that I can continue to hold to? So I could say a lot about sort of my own thinking process around that. Maybe, I guess I would say one thing is that nonviolence has moved from being kind of an intellectual thing for me to being an intensely personal thing that is about, it infuses everything. I'm not making any claim about myself being able to embody that, but it does, I feel like it infuses everything of who I am in all of my interactions, my communication, in the most basic things of negotiating, you know, the cleanup or lack of cleanup with the house I share with a friend, or, you know, to intimate partner, to cop who was, you know, ready with on the horse and baton, and that how I respond in all of those things is intensely about nonviolence in all of those things, and I think maybe I'll just tell, and so because it's intensely personal, then I think it's more about stories for me, and I think the captivity experience made it intensely personal for me, or made me aware of how intensely personal it is. So, they took, the men who kidnapped us took a series of videos, and the person who took the videos of us brought a little boy with him who was about 4 years old. And I remember, especially in the first couple of videos, the little boy was really kind of, he had this really blank look on his face. He wasn't really, he was kind of, had this body language of kind of protecting himself. He was kind of withdrawn. He was observing everything, but not, kind of scared and not sure what was going on. Kind of bizarre, really, kind of seeing, I don't know what he understood what was going on, but one of the captors, we called him Junior, sort of, he was one of the guards. He took a lot of interest in this little boy and paid a lot of attention to him, and was talking to him, crouched down and just talking, and then he took him out of the room by the hand, and then when he came back, he was on his shoulders, and he was giving him a horsey ride, and the little boy was kind of smiling. He wasn't laughing, but he was smiling, and it was helpful to him. And later, it was around New Year's Eve, the same man said that he wanted to be a suicide bomber. So he was going to, in car, this with a boom, explosive, this drive next to Humvee, this go boom. This in Jannah, in heaven, with mother, with father, with sister. He said his family home had been bombed, and so his sister and parents, his fiance, best friend had all been killed. So this in heaven, Jannah, Amriti Jaish in Jannah, in hell. Did I just hear that correctly? Like, did you just say what I thought you said? This is only something you like read about in the newspaper. People that blow themselves up. And it struck me that, you know, we were not created to blow ourselves up. We were not created to kill. We were created to heal and make beautiful art and build houses and gardens, and we were given hands to hold hands and make love and to cook dinner, and we weren't given bodies and hands to make weapons and kill. And that this man, what he wanted was to be married and have a family. That's what he was created for. And a victim of war so full of hate, he was prepared to use his body as a weapon. And that, I just felt like that doesn't apply to just like this little circumstance with this particular, but that's like everybody. We're all, this is like in our DNA, we're all, it kind of goes for all of us. Maybe one other story, and then.
By the way, could you communicate that to him? What did you tell him when he said he wanted to be a suicide bomber?
Well, I didn't. At that time, immediately I was kind of like. I was kind of like, I wasn't really sure what he had said, and then he repeated it. And then it was like, what do I say? And then it ended up being a whole other story that very bizarrely and surreally, where I was giving him a massage, which was my way to communicate to him the goodness of his body, which you can't really communicate in words. And anyway, that's a kind of another story. But so then Junior, we got into this routine where we would watch, they would take us downstairs to watch television with them, and sometimes they'd get a film from them, the latest pirated film from the market. And they were action film. Junior loved action film. And I remember there was this film, Transporter 2, where there's a bad guy who kidnaps a little boy. Anyway, so there's all this car chase and whatever. So the good guy's going after the bad guy, who's going after the kid, who's going to save this little boy. And Junior is cheering on for the good guy, who's going after the evil arch nemesis, who's the kidnapper. It's like, see, someone is confused here. And looking at my wrists, oh, the red marks there from the handcuffs. I'm kidnapped, so, and you have the gun and the keys, so I'm the helpless innocent, and you are the bad guy. I think you're the one who's confused. And it struck me that, you know, they call themselves mujahideen, holy warrior of God. I mean, just almost no more noble title than that. I mean, that's, they're fighting to end the occupation of their country. And so it struck me that they see themselves as the good guys. And the American soldiers sent there for, I'm not sure if it was weapons of mass destruction or to bring democracy, I'm not sure which one. But the soldiers, I heard them use this exact phrase, we're here to get the bad guys. So it struck me that there's really soldier and insurgent, there's no difference. They're playing, they're just acting from the same narrative, the same stage. The only difference is the name that they've given to each other. And it struck me that there's always a pointing finger in every act of violence and accusation. Go to the schoolyard, or go to the entertainment district after some drinking, or go to any major armed conflict. There's always a pointing finger that justifies, an accusation that justifies and explains why the violence is necessary. Fingers always separate too, like the pointing fingers. And in the Christian tradition, Satan is the one who accuses the accuser. It's interesting. So, to make a long story short, for me, I found that the captivity experience sort of, in this paradoxical way, confirmed for me the truth of my commitment to nonviolence for me personally. But I did not want to be there, obviously, for 1 second. And I did not want to have to pay the cost. But sometimes we don't want to, but I think that may sometimes is asked of us. That comes with the commitment. Which is terrifying, but I think that's, and in the commitment to violence is also the same commitment as in violence, because if you use violence, you have to be prepared to go all the way, because it's actually kind of you're committed when you use violence. It's this spiral, and so anyway, I sort of feel like I could, I don't want to, I think it's good to open up the discussion. Maybe does anyone have a story or a question or something they're struggling with, or yeah.
There was a day where I was with one of my friends. We were walking home from school. He lives in Guildwood in Scarborough. And a young man walked up to us. He was from the school, a high school near my friend's house. And he says, "Do you have the time?" We didn't know at the time that he was intentionally seeing if we had any valuables on us. He was about my size. And this was about a year or two ago, I think 2 years ago. And so I stopped my friend, his name's Ronnie, from pulling out his iPhone because I had a device, I think it was a video game device that told time. And I said, yeah, it's so-and-so time. It was the wrong time, actually. And then he looked at Ronnie and said, oh, what's in your pocket? And so I said, you don't need to know that. Because I think I started to get his intentions, and so we started walking away. And then one of his shorter friends came around. He grabbed my friend around the shoulders, and then I immediately, because I was doing martial arts at the time, and we sort of talked about this kind of situation. So I was thinking, what should I do? What should I do? And all I found myself doing was pulling my friend back. And I said, what do you guys want? And he said, he wants whatever you guys have. And I said, no. And like, do you want to fight? And I'm like, no. And when I look back at it now, I know that I could have fought them, and I could have gotten really angry. But instead, I actually, when it was a non-violent sort of act, and me and my friend ran. We didn't want to fight. We didn't want confrontation, and I think we did the right thing because it's very scary. But you sort of feel power. You sort of feel regret that you didn't sort of bash that person's face in. And it's a sickening feeling that you actually feel that you would have some sort of empowering feeling from having that power over somebody. But it's also frightening at the same time. That you feel like you could harm another human being who has their own reasons, their own motivations for doing such things as well. Whether it was poverty, whether it was greed, whether it was just they were having a bad day and they just wanted to do the same thing. They wanted to be in that empowering situation, but didn't have the self-control, didn't have that kind of sickening feeling that they knew it was wrong, but they still went on with it. And so we ran into a corner store, and these two young men were black, and the corner store owner said, yeah, they were black, right? And we said, yes. And he's like, oh, not surprising. And you could sort of see that, when I think about it, these young men, they dressed just like how you see people. They wore baggy pants, baggy shirts, hats. They looked like how people call it, like guys now, gangsters. And you wonder, do people do this because they feel they need to sort of justify how they look, who they are for society? And I wish I got to know those people, knew their motivations, because I knew there was more than two of them, because they were calling out to their friends. And I saw more when we were running away. And you just wonder, what drives somebody to do that? To try to mug somebody, to threaten somebody with violence. And you think, do they think their intentions are pure, that they have to do this? Is there underlying reason? Because I don't believe human beings. I don't believe that every mugger or every killer is a psychopath, but I think there's a point that every human passes, whether it's starvation, that a homeless man might steal money to feed himself or to feed his drug addiction, and that a businessman steals billions of dollars for addiction to, let's say, profit. And there's different reasons, there's different tiers to this process. And I just find it interesting, but I also find that you want to understand these people, you want to help them.
Would you be open to anyone who wanted to respond to what you said? Or?
Yeah, I've read stuff by James Gilligan. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, I've read his book as well.
And all violence comes out of shame and rage. And I think I've seen that. You know, and, I think the way we've defined human beings as being naturally aggressive, which I don't believe is true. You know, and there's so much in our culture as well, so much, you know, violence on TV and movies and stuff, that we look on this as the norm. And I think it's really, I find it really sad.
People don't bat an eye when
No.
people die in action
No.
or anything. Because it's sort of desensitized, isn't it?
Yeah.
in programs you in a way,
Yeah.
which is saddening.
Did you want to respond to? Okay. I was just. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, no, I've also read James Gilligan. I really like that. The shame is really so interesting because a lot of these people, if you start asking why they do such a thing, which I think is what you're doing, then you start seeing it from their perspective, which is a lot more interesting rather than just from your perspective as the victim. They're also a victim, I think, of their own culture, of their own society, and who knows, what drove them to that behavior. They probably weren't born that way to want to do such a thing. But if they're getting no respect from anywhere, and I think I don't know if it was in Gilligan's book or another one, where they give out the example of someone holding a gun for the first time at somebody and pointing at someone, and they felt so empowered, and that feeling was more power than they had felt in their entire life, and it just rejuvenated them. It's just this rush
The shame
they
on
felt because they'd never gotten it any other way, and nobody respected what they had to say, and nobody respected who they were, and so they felt this was the only alternative for them. In this situation, perhaps there's some of that there, but in the end, in a more equal society, I think what you're going to have less.
Just responding to.
I suspect that these young men weren't individually doing this, but this was a group process, and that a whole different dynamic occurs because people identify with one side or another in a conflict. The most extreme example I think of that is Chris Hedges' book, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. Chris Hedges was a correspondent for the New York Times. I think he went to 13 wars. He went to every war he could get into. He was addicted to war. And he eventually wrote about it. He actually had a background as a theologian. He had a degree in theology from Harvard. I think his analysis is generally more Manichaean than mine. I don't like his extreme way of portraying sides, but he did have this amazing insight about when you're in a war, life gets much more exciting and much more fulfilling, and you have a purpose and you identify with one side, and you can't help it. And even if you're a correspondent sent there and you're not really part of this group at all, you can't help taking sides. You can't help being swept up in this. And my experience is, having taken in a family of refugees, Tamil refugees from Sri Lanka, and they became part of my family, and we were a family for many years. It was absolutely impossible to interrupt the process of identification with the Tamil cause and to say, the father of the family was probably the leading Tamil spokesperson in Canada, eventually, Tiger spokesperson. And he would talk about, I'm doing this for my people. Who are your people? The world is your people. Everybody's your people. What are you doing? One side being your people. You cannot interrupt that. He could not. Once that dynamic is going, the extraordinary extent to which identification with one side or another in a war, or probably in your case, local, could be two different schools, or some, antipathy that may be just totally imaginary between two different groups of people, but they identify with one or another, and it justifies almost anything. And to me, it is as bad a mystery as you've already put. You put out there the question, how can they think this way? I don't have an answer, but I'm only saying that for sure, in a dramatic polarization of conflict of that kind, boy, it's hard to break that. It is just a human identification that will justify damn near anything that one side wants to do to the other. And Chris Hedges himself almost had to take a vow not to go to war again. It was kind of hard for him to give it up, because he saw that what he was doing was so bad for himself that he couldn't stand it anymore, but he found it difficult to actually stay away from that kind of conflict. I don't know how much of that speaks to those guys you're talking about, but I think there's a connection there.
I think that with these individuals is that, and referencing James Gilligan's book again, is that people will seek families as well.
Seek what?
Families. They seek a connection, like a family-like connection, and gangs and groups of mischief makers, and a lot of things, and non-violent ways as well. And people, when their society or when their parents don't pay much attention to them, or they don't feel wanted by their society or by their parents or by the school system or the education system, as seen with people, let's say, in low-income communities and ghettos. And that's where these gangs get power, because they feel like they're part of something. They feel like they're part of a family who will do anything for them, will even kill for them, kill for their respect. And that's a powerful, powerful motive.
Okay, I'm thinking, so a lot of the discussion is analysis of violence. And I'm hoping we can focus a bit on the difficult questions of non-violence, maybe that we're struggling with around our own commitment to it, or what we are finding difficult.
It was kind of nuts, because it was. And I heard yells and screams, and came around a corner, and there was a white man. Is race important? Probably not. It doesn't matter. There was a large man who had beaten a woman down to the ground and was proceeding to kick her. She'd almost stopped fighting. And I got all Canadian and went, no, 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 and that wasn't working. So I actually made a different choice, predicated on my body and my experience. And I actually did this. And so here I am, and there's this very large man, and this woman on the ground, and I just looked up at him and I said, you will hit me. You will hit me until I'm on the ground too. And he stopped, and he just looked at me, and he said, you are the strangest fucking woman I've ever met. We haven't actually been introduced. And he got into his truck and stormed off. And this woman, whose body I was like kind of pressed up against, I'm kind of going, hi, sister, sorry. And she turns around and she says, how dare you get in my business? How dare you interfere with my life? And I'm like, I don't know. Sorry. Do I respond? And my response was, it was hurting me to watch him hurt you. At which point, something in her just collapsed. And she fell into my arms and she just sobbed. And then at some point, she just kind of went, okay, can't do this anymore. And actually, I think the race is important here because this was a black woman. And I was trying to speak Zulu to her, and it wasn't going very well. And eventually, she just started laughing at me, and she said, honey, I appreciate what's just happened here, but you need to stop trying to speak Zulu because you're calling me a cucumber or something. So here I am with all my Canadian stuff. I think I've done something good, and I'm getting yelled at. I think I'm trying to reach out and communicate in a language that someone speaks, and she's kind of saying, stop calling me a cucumber, honey. And I'm like, but I did good, right? I did good. And I don't know. I don't know if I did good.
You did good. You did do good, in my opinion. You did very good.
I had to act because it was hurting me, and I acknowledge that I was acting from a pain that I couldn't ignore in myself. And that, for me, is a quandary, is when I act in the world For whom am I truly acting? I don't have an answer. That's just my...
Wow, it's a powerful story. Well, my background is Latin American, and I went through that situation many times, unfortunately. It's a way of life in Latin American countries. I have a bit from all the things that you are talking about here. I try to use my best English to try to you understand me. But first, I think that we are living in a fear society, and that is the big problem. We forgot the love and the compassion in our lives. That is a big thing that I can see. The life bring me to Canada, but I live in 4 countries now, including Canada. And I found the same problems, the same situations in every country. The structure of the civilization is not working. We did something wrong in some, we did the wrong step some time, and we are not able to change that. We are so stuck in this society that we create that we think that many things are natural, and they are not. We create a very bad society, and we can know how to change things now. We are stuck in this thing, the fear that these gang people feel, they fulfill with that attitude, you know. That thing that, I think the non-violence attitude have to come from knowing that you are part of a big thing. That is the key of the religions. You know, you are part of something big than you and humanity. And but we have to know that we are only one planet with the same air circulating around, and everything that Japanese people do there, so in some point will come in here.
It's already here.
Well, but my point is everything. It's not only the air, it's the water, it's the pollution, it's the food, the violence. Everything is interconnected. We are only one planet, only one humanity. And if we don't solve the problems globally, we can solve anything. We can do little spots that if are too good to live there, somebody will come and take it. You know, because nothing, we can fix anything in little spots. That means the non-violence attitude can be part of a little town, city, or nation. Have to be a global movement, have to be a new attitude from everybody, you know, because we are learned that we have to hate others. That is that the civilization teach me in my 55th years now. I have to hate, I have to step in your head in order to be successful in this society. I can think with love for you because it's against my business, any kind of business I have. You know, I have to step on you in order to
grow. If we don't change that, we create violent situations every second. That's my point of view.
Good point of view.
And maybe anyone present.
You should read my back. Read my back.
Yep.
Well, maybe I should. Sorry, did you want me to?
Well, I don't know. Whoever of you two wants to go.
Well, I'll just speak a little of my own experience. I come from quite a violent background because I was born during the war in England and experienced bombing and going into bomb shelters at night and a lot of moving around. And my father was in the army, and like most people, you know, he fought in the Burma campaign, and like most people who fought in active warfare, you know, end up with post-traumatic stress disorders, and it's becoming more to the foreground or becoming more public now. So I grew into a pretty angry person. And I always sort of, and I got into peace stuff quite early because I just don't believe that war is the answer for anything. And I used to justify, you know, as a way to channel my anger. But I don't really think that anger helps very much. And I think peace has to start within ourselves. In the last few years, actually, I've been doing quite a bit of meditation. And one can connect with that sort of non-violent, you know, that peaceful part within oneself. And I think it really has to start there. And Karen, I don't know, are you familiar with Karen Armstrong's work? She wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Great Transformation. And she was talking about the axial age, when the answer to the violence that was going on in the world was radical compassion, and to, you know, and I think only really a change in consciousness will bring this about. You know, violence is no answer to violence. Anyway, that's kind of my journey.
Sorry, just want to say two things. One, in terms of sort of dealing with a violent situation, I think it's depending on the situation and your own size. But during one of the marches with Martin Luther King, someone had attacked him. And what one of his friends did was to give the guy like a bear hug from behind. It's kind of like to stop him. And I thought that was kind of cute, maybe a little flowery. And then I think they just waited till the police came. Of course, certain situations don't work, and if you are perhaps a smaller person, that might not work. And secondly, on the note of South Africa, I was wondering, what about when arguably, like, let's say, peaceful means have been exhausted? I think you should remember that like, Nelson Mandela was not committed to nonviolence. He supported groups that would attack like symbols of their oppression. I think it'd be like buildings, and I believe they would even would not be opposed to attacking people, and arguably that created publicity, and people around the world learned about the plight of people in apartheid South Africa and helped arguably end apartheid there. So just posing that question.
I can respond briefly from my perspective about that. The armed wing of the ANC in Mkhonto the armed wing of the ANC was called Mkhonto Siswe, and they were in fact prepared to use violent means. In retrospect, coming up to 16, 17 years after the transition, the ANC and Mkhonto Siswe, the cadres, have actually acknowledged that violent means had far less to do with the dismantling of the apartheid state than did other non-violent means. This is going to sound bizarre, but the sports boycott had more effect on dismantling apartheid than any other single force, because white South Africans are rugged, sports-loving things, and it killed them to not be able to take their sports teams internationally. And that did more to galvanize white public opinion than blowing things up. I mean, you normalize violence. You know, you walk past the post office and it's gone. You just kind of go, oh damn, the post office is gone. You hate that. So that's my experience, both during the struggle and post-apartheid, was that the critical analysis within South Africa is that the armed struggle actually was less effective than many of the other means they chose to use. My perspective.
Well, I just wanted to say that what this gentleman said, that we have to solve it globally, is very true. And as I'm sure you are aware, most of you anyway, that Fukushima, parts of Fukushima is already within your lungs. So you can't get away from it. Also, how it feels coming from there to here. This seems very comfortable.
Coffee.
I could even take a little snooze and it's okay. But there, the global consciousness is very connected. You can't think there without thinking of all the other cities, Wall Street and everywhere else, hundreds of cities across the world who are doing that. And they have identified a cause. And the cause is the structure of violence of capitalism. And I can't, this person-to-person thing is important, I guess, in personal interactions. But as a single issue, if there is a global, how should I say, violence going on, structural violence going on, okay, they are addressing it. And after all these nice, conversations, I really invite you to go there and see how you can apply your non-violent techniques to this large challenge that humanity faces. I think that's where the big challenge is.
Yep, I'm planning to. I'm just getting learned before I hit the...
Yeah. No, it's nice to get warmed up here, but you need it.
Anyone who hasn't spoken, just to create that space, and then...
I'd just like to ask a question. I think there's sort of a consensus that we're not by nature violent, but is there not also an instinct in us that would rise up to defend, like what you talked about? Your way of defending was to lie on the woman. Yours was to, because you got the physical size, you were able to, and the age-old question, if I'm sitting at home and there's a home invader comes in, wants to rape my daughter or kill my wife or whatever, do I not have an instinct within me? Do I not have a responsibility to react violently? If I have a baseball bat or I have a crowbar or something handy, I'm going to grab it and I'm going to wail away at somebody to protect those who I love.
I just add, I think there's a difference between reacting and responding. Mm-hmm. In responding, you have a choice. In reacting, you don't. Because you're usually reacting out of old stuff or whatever, emotionally. When you respond, you have a choice as to what you will do.
If somebody knocks my door down and...
Well, I think there's still a difference between reacting and responding.
So what should my response be?
Whatever. I mean, obviously it would be to stop the situation. I mean, you're not going to let someone, but you're not doing it from a violent place in yourself.
Right. Yeah, because I don't know if I can say honestly, but I like to believe that if violence is perpetrated against me personally, I could tolerate it,
Well,
and people would disagree with me as to whether I should have to tolerate that or not. But it really wouldn't be a concern, but there's something very deep in you as a father and a husband that is going to come out to respond differently if you're...
I have two histories that I want to share.
Sure, if I could just respond to yours. My understanding from at least like Canadian law is you're allowed to respond to a force proportional to what you're being threatened with. So it would not be okay if someone pokes you to break their arm, but like to respond with proportional force. So if you're, I guess it's kind of, it's not clear what that would be, but if someone is threatening, let's say your partner or your daughter, there would be something you could do, but I think like killing them in a most violent way would be, of course, over the top. There's, I guess, a balance, which can be tricky.
So that's what you would mean by a response rather than a reaction. Just don't fly into a blind rage and pummel the guy to death, but simply use whatever force I need to stop the situation. My dad was a Baptist minister, and there were 2 examples when I was a kid. Ran a teenage club on Friday nights, and there was one girl who insisted on lighting up and smoking, not outside the church, but inside the church. So he threw her out a couple of Friday nights in a row, and then it was just a country church, had a gravel parking lot, so every Saturday he would rake the parking lot so it'd be nice and smooth. And this girl's father came in, grabbed the rake, and beat him with the rake, and I was helping him rake at that point in time. And he didn't do anything about it. The guy wasn't hitting him with the sharp end, just with the handle. And I told him, you know, how can you throw a girl out of church and all this kind of thing. But he was sort of half cut. But my dad didn't do anything about it. He just took the blows, and the guy eventually wore himself out and left. So that made an impression on me. And then there was, probably I think within the same year, there was a family up the road, and the father was a drunkard. And he got a call from the fellow's wife, or I think it was actually one of the children, said, my dad is beating up my mom. So my dad went up, and the fellow had a broken whiskey bottle and came at him. Well, in that case, he punched him right in the face and knocked him out cold. And so those 2 images have always stuck in my head, you know, as to how you respond and that kind of thing. So those are 2 little stories that really impacted me. I was probably about 12.
I think if you're threatening...
Yeah, sorry, there's a bit of... I sense you've been wanting to speak for a bit. I don't know, like, and then Meta, and then I think you had one to say.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out where that line... I mean, I think everyone in this room believes that nonviolence is the preferred method, but when is that exhausted? When is the line? When is Hitler around that we have to get rid of Hitler and use violence to do it? Where is that line? I think that's kind of one of the things I'm trying to figure out. I don't know how to put it better than that. How do we...
That's really
clear, yeah.
Looking for that answer.
Do you want to respond? And then you were going to tell a story. So
yeah,
is it your story?
Are very related to the things out. If you want to take the...
Yeah, I think the difference is in how we in our attitude toward conflict. And Gene Sharp is not particularly friendly to the peace movement. I've known Gene Sharp since 1982. He's a good friend. And he has a rather guarded attitude toward the peace movement, which I'm part of. And his reason is that peace activists just hate conflict and will try to deny it or make it go away. And I hear most of what goes on here as a reflection of the fact that we do not really want to believe that there are serious conflicts that we really need to fight. But in fact, there are things that we would give our lives for, principles and defending people and defending rights and so on. And we would be glad to give our lives for certain things, which really indicates the fact that we would, in certain circumstances, recognize that there are conflicts that are real conflicts, and you can't wish them away, and you can't hope that by spiritually improving yourself that you will magically make them vanish. There are serious conflicts, and there are even conflicts that you need to fight. You have to wage conflict as well as make it go away. Sometimes you can make it go away, and if you can't, then there are times when you have to actually wage conflict. And his methods are devised as ways of using nonviolence as weapons. And instead of fighting a war, instead of killing people, he would show you how to use nonviolent tactics to win precisely in a conflict. And when you have accepted that this is a conflict that you're willing to actually give your life for, even, then you have to think about, how can I do this? How can I fight this war without hurting anybody else? And that's what's the beautiful thing about it, is that sometimes You can find tactics that actually succeed in getting you where you need to go and winning a conflict in a situation without actually damaging other human beings. And maybe the chance, and usually in fact, the chances are that you're less likely to be damaged yourself than if you went into a situation intending to use violence. That's all I want to say, that the distinction between, I think Chai was saying he'd been down there watching people preparing themselves to use nonviolent methods to fight a struggle. And what I hear here is a lot of people wanting to use nonviolent methods as a way of avoiding a struggle.
Can I say something? Well, I think maybe after. Well, yeah. We'll make sure to get you because I haven't spoken yet. So.
I have two sad stories about my time here in Canada. I'll be all the time superintendent in a building. And the first time this happened, I was in the office. It's in the lobby in the building. And I saw a black lady coming out of to my side. And the guy behind her, hitting her in the head with the cell phone. And he said 2 steps there, the lady almost fell down in the steps and goes against the mailboxes. Then I coming out of the office and say to the guy, hey, stop to hit the lady. And he started to yelling on me and still hitting the lady. And I asked the lady to leave the building in order to keep the guy inside, to try to, I'm a big guy, to try to put my body between the two fighting, because the lady was fighting back too, you know. But the guy was hitting the lady, and the lady never can hit him. Finally, I have to call the police. And I stayed with the guy there inside, the lady was outside, until the police came, and the guy, finally the police take the guy, and end of the history. 2 weeks later, the guy was in my office, apologized for the situation. And he was very, very polite. He said he was crazy, he never wanted to do that, and this and that. They moved out of the building, and 2 months later, I saw the guy in the newspaper. The guy killed somebody, not the lady, but somebody. That shocked me, you know. That was something like if I know the guy or something. It was one of my tenants, but I never have a really close relationship with the guy. The next story was somebody called me that in the 4th floor, a crazy lady was yelling on the floor. And then I ran up and checked the lady, and the lady was on the floor with a swelling cheek, you know. And the lady say, help me, and I say, what happened? What can I do? I recognize the lady like one of my tenants. It's a black lady from immigrant family. They have a little kid, a very nice couple, and the guy, very thin guy. Then in some moment I was calling the police because I saw the swelling cheek. The guy came out from the apartment and kicked the lady in the floor in front of me. And I say, hey, don't do that again. And I put my body between both guys.
Your big body.
Yeah, my big belly. And, the lady was down in the floor. The guy was walking like a lion, you know. He wanted to kill the lady. I can see that in the eyes. The eyes were was a special situation, you know. I can see the hate in the face of this guy, and he walk around and he say sorry, sorry, say to me, because he was very polite with me, and I was very nice with the couple in previous situations for my job. But that still there, you know, was something to do with the lady was pregnant, and the guy was noticed that day or something. It's something cultural there. I don't know what happened, you know. I don't have the details. The thing is, police come in, they take the guy out of the building. They put some restriction to the guy. The lady is still living there. Then I think 2 months later, she moved out to one place where the ladies are take care when they are a shelter or something. And like a month later, somebody asked me for the little rec room we have in the building in order to have a service in honor of this lady that was killed by my husband. They are sad examples of the violence environment that we are living every day. Not only here, because here you can say, well, the movies, you know, the movies create too much violence. But if you live for a week in a Latin American country or many of the poor countries in the world, you can see the poverty there is very different than the poverty here. The poor people here is poor because the government is helping the people, the families. There is no government to help. Is nobody to give a piece of bread. Nothing. You know, they are dying. You can see people dying in the streets. You know. Then many of that violence coming embed into the culture. And to repeat again, to try to create a non-violence attitude in your life, you have to change the life from the roots, you know. You have to create a new world. It's the only way. That's my thinking about that.
I think just to acknowledge that the violence is very gendered, isn't it? Almost all the examples, I think, have involved men as the perpetrators of violence.
Well, unfortunately, I don't have any personal stories that won't just echo the same kind of sentiment that I've heard others talk about. You know, typical stuff like being bullied as a kid, and how I feel like there's rage deep inside me that, you know what I mean, could really come out in these kinds of non-violent confrontation if violence is being perpetrated upon me. But I just feel like, I think it's almost needless to say that we're in very pivotal times right now for mankind. And you talked about how we need to use Gene Sharp's techniques as weapons. And it's not that I'm taking issue with the choice of the word weapon, but I think a more appropriate word would be tool. And that these tools, I believe, must be used to convey or initiate a change in consciousness that is required globally if we are to also change not only the way we think, but the way we live. Because unfortunately, the way we live right now, we live within a system where corporate powers, bankers, nation states are able to exert their influence or control over us because we are dependent on the system. So if there's a documentary that I watched recently by a Canadian filmmaker by the name of Ben Stewart, brilliant man, called Ungrip. And it's just basically the story of a guy by the name of Robert LePage. In fact, he no longer goes by the name Robert Earl Page. Was his sort of assigned corporate identity, I guess, and he's now Robert of the Page family. And it's not just some random guy that is, doing a film on him, but it's someone that he's developed a bond with. And how, through the use of free men on the land and that kind of stuff, and Burton built himself an Earthship, and in the process rekindled a relationship with his ex-wife, and they've been back together for like 10 years. And that's the kind of thing I think that is going to be our saving grace as a species, as more importantly, as civilization. And that it's great that we can use Gene Sharp's techniques to dethrone or win very much the sympathy of the masses, I believe. I think is one of the reasons why nonviolence is so effective. Because you can show that, look, we're being perpetrated upon, our human rights are being violated, and not only that, we're being beat up. So to get the attention, the sympathy, and the heart swell that's necessary for us to go into a new paradigm that doesn't involve fear, and instead involves love. And that should, I believe, I hope, would give us the courage globally to start living differently, start living more sustainably, and the old power structures, they will just fall away, they will just melt away. That's what I believe in my heart.
When human beings can care about each other, that's when it's going to be hard, like you said, to just disregard them and go ahead and be more successful as a sacrifice of their happiness. And that's, like you said, is when the hatred and the disembodiment of another human being, when that is when disillusionment of these systems happens, that is when we'll get back to, I think, where we should be, is when we actually regard other human beings with love, and that they feel loved as well.
Anyone that hasn't spoken yet, just to make the space there, and no pressure, but we'll just leave that space for just a minute, just a few seconds.
I think our media has a huge influence and responsibility in how we perceive what goes on in our world, how we perceive the other. I mean, their portrayal of, they go along with the lies that were perpetrated in invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, even Libya, you go under our 2P, the responsibility to protect. Now it's the right to plunder, they just totally reversed it. And our media doesn't do anything to make the public aware. There's no critical analysis of what our governments are doing at all. And, when they do interview someone who they might call a leftist, they call them a nutbar and the crazy person, the conspiracy theorist and all of this, where these are the actual facts of what is being done. And because our media is in bed with the corporations, and the politicians are in bed with the corporations, it's a tremendously difficult battle to fight to bring public awareness, because most people, unfortunately, just watch their television news, and that's the opinion they have. Yeah, we need to invade Iraq.
Get tough on crime.
We need to get tough on crime. We need to get rid of those weapons of mass destruction. It doesn't matter that they don't have any weapons of mass destruction. People just buy every argument that they, they're of the opinion of the last newscaster they heard, when they're all saying the same thing, and it's all lies. It's really, really difficult.
I'd like to just make a couple comments, and then we have about 10 minutes, and then we just, if there's any sort of concluding thoughts. I was, one of the things I think that's interesting about violence is it's always justified. It goes together, justified violence. It's just, if you analyze it, there's always a story behind why this, like, even if we look at the stories and, you know, what these men were, what we're doing on the, as we hear, like, what the heck, like but in their mind, there's a story why they had to do that. So I think it's really crucial that we look at those stories that we're fed. And I think another thing is that also the physical power that we have determines our options around violence or non-violence. So if I'm a big strapping guy like you, it's like, no problem, let me just solve this. But if I'm a small woman, well, I'm not going to be able to do that. So then I have to think of something else, another kind of intervention, another kind of power. So how we see, it's about seeing what is possible, and how we see what's possible is shaped by how physically powerful we feel. I think also behind every act of violence, it's an act of faith. The violence is going to make this better. We're going to stabilize Afghanistan. We're going to bring rights to women. We're going to stop Hitler. There's an act of faith inherent in every act of violence, as there is in nonviolence. So I think it's a question of what do we put our faith in, and what we put our faith in shapes our imagination, shapes how we prepare ourselves for that moment when we're confronted. We don't come just like, oh, today I'm here. We come with all of our experience, all of our knowledge, our beliefs, our imagination are brought to that moment and shape what we do. So if I'm fed on, action film and, the heroic
testosterone movies.
Yeah, then it's like, when I'm taking martial arts courses can help us actually get out of physical things, but they can also lead us into it as well. So there's an act of faith there, whether you choose violence or non-violence. I think also we have to distinguish between the moment when we're in the immediate threat of violence and what we do there, and social policy and armies and the social phenomenon of violence, and also understanding that we could look at these little case studies and analyze what's going on with these men, and we could probably see there's a whole system of violence, a culture of violence that's brought them to this point. So how do we intervene there? Is it more violence, or are we looking at non-violent social policy, somehow systemic, economic, to actually have something different? Again, it's where we, I think, put our faith and that affecting our imagination. I think that we can come to nonviolence in many different ways. It can be purely a tactical thing. It can be a philosophical kind of position that we come to.
A way of life?
A way of life. It can be a religious commitment. But I think of, and I don't know if the test is, the moment when my daughter is going to be killed. Like, I'm not sure that is the test for violence or non-violence. I think it's much more like, it's way, way before that. It's like, what is the society in which this violence is happening and what is causing it? And, Rwanda, yes, when the machetes are out and the blood is running in the street, is that the test? Or is it like a month before, or a year, or 20 years before? And at any point, there could have been an intervention that would have prevented that. Oh, well, now we have to send the army in. Well, okay, but we could have. So the point of argument, where you start your analysis and your intervention, clearly it would be before. And I think a lot about Jack Layton's letter. I forget the exact, hope is better than despair, love is better than hate, and optimism is better than pessimism or something. And I really love that. I thought it was so beautiful because it's not saying that, hope is the only way or something. It's better. Non-violence is better than violence. And I think that we need to, myself, I feel like not approach it like, it's this, categorical moralistic thing. It's right, it's that it's better in the same spirit as the other things are better. And they're going to get us in the long run to the place where we want to be. So those are some of the things I've been reflecting on as I'm hearing. So we have about 5 minutes. Does anyone else have a final reflecting word based on everything we've heard and just something that sort of...
Yeah, well, between violence and none, we choose none, without really specifically knowing the method, but between a choice, I've made my choice, right? And if ever I find myself, like you said, in a helpless situation or fear that I've never encountered before, at least I know I made a choice of non-violence, and hopefully it will lead me to the right path. But that choice I could make now, even before I'm confronted with something that I don't know how I would react, and hopefully it never comes to that point. But along the way, I could increase the tools I could use so that I become a more non-violent person, or so that's it. Like a wrap up for me.
To add to that, let's say hypothetically you were in a third world country, and you find yourself with a gun pointed to you, and because you were doing something non-violent, like a protest against the oppression of a certain people during Civil War. If you went back and stopped the illegal weapon stealing and protested that person wouldn't have a gun, and you'd have a better chance of surviving if that person does pull the trigger. They wouldn't have those tools for that oppression. So before, we had to learn to stop the oppression before it happens. Just like when in medicine, we should learn to prevent the disease before you have to suffer from it.
Yeah, like to respond, like you said, my takeaway is, as early as after this conference, I can make a choice. And those choices can be complemented, confirmed with further education, but it's a simple choice between violence and non-violence. And to me, it's a no-brainer, right? So, further information, but like I know what you're talking, but specifically now, I'm thinking, if I'm joining this takeover Toronto thing, if I am confronted with a violent act, even if it's not directed towards me, I already know I will try and figure out what's the most non-violent way to prevent it or preserve the non-violent motives of the youth. So right there and then, my decision would kind of dictate which path might not be the best, might not be the right, but I know it doesn't involve further violence. So that's as far as I go. Like after this, if I go, I want to know what to do. At the very least, I figured out, use technology, take a picture of the guy. Because again, putting yourself, like you say, it has to be on the moment thing. But for sure, I know it has to be non-violent. And if I find myself in a situation that would lead towards further violence, then that's where my limits are. I don't know what to do. So I guess it's stopped there. But I know, all I know is the pursuit of any non-violent means to end. And that's it.
So the last word to anyone who hasn't spoken, and then we'll conclude.
There you go,
I
Michelle.
I just wanted to point out, just reflecting on what everyone's saying, especially what you were saying. Sorry, I don't know your name. Sorry?
Jorge.
Jorge, nice to meet you. The fact that educating people at a young age, I think, is really essential, especially about just gender inequalities and social justice and equities in general. I think teaching youth and educating them and raising awareness about issues in the world, just
gender roles.
Yeah, and the possibilities and the opportunities everybody has as a unique individual and as an equal individual. I think it's really essential just to instill that in them from a young age. Just because looking at what the world has turned into, what the world has transformed into, what you've experienced in your lifetime is so different 10 years ago, 20 years ago from what it is now.
Yeah, I think together with that, and educating girls too, like in more impoverished nations, is very essential.
Definitely.
Last word for anyone who hasn't spoken.
I'll say something. What you're saying about education is basically why I'm here, thinking about these things. I have 2 young children and I'm a teacher, so I'm really thankful for hearing everybody's stories and letting me think about things in a different way.
Should we all have a big group hug or something? Let's end it off with something.
Well, you have a suggestion? We can hold hands for a moment. How's that?
Yeah.
Maybe group hug feels a little
Feel
the life in each of us. Yeah.
Which way? That way? We'll try and feel it. The energy going clockwise.
Squeeze. Okay, start to squeeze. Squeeze.
Start squeezing your left hand.
I don't know which is my left hand.
I don't know, I just I'm just
passing it around.
Is it coming? There it is.
I'm not sure. I'm squeezing either way.
Come back to you.
I've been squeezed.
Thank you.
Thank you.